would be sent to the Republican. And this is similar in Nebraska. As Nebraska, if Nebraska's 2nd district votes for a Democrat, while the whole state voted for a Republican, the 2nd district's vote will go towards a Democrat. And I believe that is, in my opinion, although questions and concerns about that will be answered more towards the end, is the better alternative to what we have currently for the Electoral College.
And of course, we're fortunate enough to be joined by an alum of Politically Active, Gabriel Patino. We've invited you here, of course, to make the antagonistic case, to argue against the Electoral College. Why, in general, do you take that position?
So I think in general, I take this position because the reasons for having the Electoral College that are outlined in Federalist 68 by Hamilton are largely irrelevant in modernity. While at one time it served a really important purpose, most of those issues, most of the obstacles that it was intended to overcome are no longer applicable, and I think it creates an onerous and unnecessary separation between the citizenry and the executive.
Our friend Isaiah weighed in, however, and while he argues.
Well, I believe that. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just got we had a comment from our friend Roberta Simmons. I hope once again everybody is able to hear. Anyway, so Gabriel, one thing that Isaiah did throw out there was the notion that perhaps a solution. I don't know if it meets us in the middle. I don't know what percentage it meets us at, but the solution of potentially going proportional across the states. And I just want to reiterate this to everybody listening. The way the Electoral College works is that every state is winner take all, effectively. There's a couple exceptions that Isaiah just mentioned, but every state is winner take all. If I win Missouri by 10 million votes, I don't even know how many people are in Missouri, but I get every single Electoral College vote from Missouri. However, if I win Missouri by 10 votes, I still get every single winner take all. Now, that does not seem to be Isaiah's position. He seems to be open to proportional and breaking it up based on population. What about yourself?
I'm in favor of a completely direct democratic system for the election of the president. I think the idea of proportional representation, where electors are assigned based on the various electoral districts within a state, is still subject to problems that are already endemic within the system regarding gerrymandering and the dilution of minority votes.
Obviously, the biggest problem, Isaiah, that people have with the Electoral College is it's possible to lose the popular vote by a lot. Like, we had a huge one back in 2016. Hillary Clinton won 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. I think it was like 2,900,000. Brother, that's Minnesota. She won by an entire Minnesota. And yet, because of the labyrinthine rules of the Electoral College, Donald Trump became president. Now, our political opinions about winners and losers aside, why does that create any hesitation? What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that while it is true that Hillary Clinton did get 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, she did not get an outright majority of the population on her side. I believe that is one of the core values the founding fathers incorporated when creating the Electoral College. She only got 48% of the population's vote, while Donald Trump got 46% of the population's vote. And the way the Electoral College is established is so that the winner has to have outright majority of most of the popular vote. The popular vote tends to favor, historically, the Electoral College tends to favor the popular vote winner most elections. Out of the 59 presidential elections in the history of the United States, only 5 of which have detracted from the popular vote winner. And every single election besides the election of 1876, no candidate received an outright majority of the American popular vote, with popular notoriety going to Andrew Jackson only getting 42% of the vote and Al Gore not getting 50% of the vote. And this system is incorporated so that the decision of president is vested in the majority of the people, and when it does not go to the majority of people, it is then sent to the states. And I believe by doing this, it ensures that the most powerful position, the American executive, is in the hands of someone that the majority of the country can trust. If it's not directly by the people, then the states and the representatives directed by the people have the better say in deciding who the president is during the great time of division.
Gabriel, obviously, I would have to think that this would be one of the headlining reasons why you were opposed to it. Would your reaction on that particular point, or anything that Isaiah may have said?
I mean, I take issue with the idea that handing it back to state legislatures or state representatives necessarily is a means of embodying the will of the people, considering the same gerrymandering that goes on at the local level. Along with that, I think just getting rid of the electors prevents the type of shenanigans that we've seen with attempts to enact the independent state legislature theory, which would remove the judiciary and other regulating bodies from involvement in the electoral process at a state level. Now, while the Supreme Court has struck that down, I don't really think that that is going to prevent more attempts for legislatures in the states to continue to attempt to co-opt power from the people and further take power away from minorities in this country.
Any thoughts on that, Isaiah?
Well, I have to say, with my proportion system that I believe in, it is crucial for that proportion system to have a constitutional ban on gerrymandering. I believe for that point, every state should have a committee consisting of equal number of Democrats, Republicans, and independents that come together to form a map that is equal and does not disenfranchise minority voters. Still, in the national elections, I don't believe that there is a lot of disenfranchisement. There is a certain degree, there is, but
I will also say that the independent state legislature theory that Gabriel floated has made its way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rejected it. Am I wrong on that, Gabriel?
No, it was struck down, but I don't think that is going to prevent further attempts from enacting something in a similar vein. And given that one of the reasons for the Electoral College's existence in the first place within Federalist 68 is to avoid that type of tumult and consternation that occurred with the attempts to pursue that theory during the 2020 election. I think we are just better off not having it, just completely removing any space for those types of arguments to exist.
Now, this is not an official debate tournament, and we don't follow official debate rules here. Isaiah, technically, your position really only should be defending the Electoral College. That really just should be your opinion. But if I may be unfair for a moment, do you have any reason why not a straight up public vote? We do straight up public votes for mayor. We do straight up public votes for governor. Why not public votes? I'm sorry, a straight up popular vote for president?
well, I see many issues with that. If we were to have a straight up popular vote for president, more of the urban areas would be concentrated in campaigns, and the demographics of which would be more appealed to urban voters. And I think the Electoral College, which does more so appeal to swing states, is a better alternative to a national popular vote, simply because in appealing to swing states, you have to appeal to a large variety of voters and Americans that normally wouldn't be appealed to if it was just to focus on, let's say, urban areas and urban issues. So the state of New Hampshire, for example, they have to focus on opioid crises to get ahead in that state. In Ohio, you have to focus on steel mills, and in Georgia, you have to focus on peanut farmers. The idea that you must focus on more than just certain parts of the country is very intuitive to what the Electoral College represents, that everyone and every American should have a voice. And the executive should be paying attention to every single voter and not just urban voters. I believe that is a positive of the Electoral College and a positive towards my proportional system, where it gives every single state and every single group in America the right to express the issues that matter most to the executive. Again, the most important position anyone can be elected to. And I think that I do stand by that.
And Gabriel, just to kind of build on the point Isaiah just made, and thank you, Isaiah, for making it so well. And both of you, thank you again. At the end of the day, the Electoral College does force you to win an array of the country geographically. You can't just win. A big complaint you'll hear from right now, because the Electoral College politically favors Republicans a little bit. You hear Republicans talk about the coasts. We don't want the coast determining elections. And I don't know how much you believe that particular argument, but at least at the end of the day, the Electoral College does force you to have broader appeal than just a certain populous tight areas. Your thoughts on that, Gabriel?
Well, I can understand the importance of that, especially, in theory. I don't think that the reality of the United States today leads itself to regional interests that are as narrowly served by having a particular executive with a set of policy positions in office as they did when this system was established. To that ends, I think that the interests of the state directly are well handled within the Senate and the House itself, and bringing those forward, because I don't think that there are people in urban areas that are discounting the importance of things like the rural opioid crisis. And I think that going through the process of bringing that to a bill in the legislature is going to be passed by an executive. It's not an issue where you're going to run into a lot of consternation on that.
You have any thoughts on what he just said, Isaiah?
Well, I do think he makes a sound point. However, I do think that fundamentally speaking, my point still applies that while yes, if we were to have a national popular vote, issues like the rural opioid crisis would not entirely be ignored. It still connects with our checks and balances, because the President of the United States is a very unique position, especially when it was introduced to the world. There was no position like it quite yet in history before up until that point. And there has to be certain checks and balances. You see, the Connecticut Compromise brought us to Senate, the New Jersey's Compromise brought us to House. And I believe the president brings a balance to both. As, like I said previously, the popular vote winner is more likely than not going to win the Electoral College. While the Electoral College, even if they don't win, it still gives a lot of power to the states and the states themselves, so they can focus on issues. And there is a lot of division between the states. Every state is different. It can be compared to as its own country. States like Louisiana are radically different than states like Washington. They have their own set of economic ideals, political beliefs, religious beliefs, and a lot of points. There's going to be points of contention between the both. So there has to be a balance brought between the two before we can go in and directly say that, issues are not going to be avoided. Like the more religious places like Utah are going to have different policies on, for example, polyamorism than a state like Missouri, who is notoriously against that. So at the end of the day, there's still going to be contention between these issues, and focusing more on a state to state level and, sort of equalizing the states is far better than just, let's give New York and California all the power and leave states like Wyoming, North Dakota, Missouri, Arkansas in the dust, and focus on the issues that benefit them more, while they might negate us.
Gabriel, reaction, sir?
Even considering that there are different interests in different states, I believe, especially with a lot of the current political issues that we are looking at, the opioid crisis, which affects rural and urban communities, gun issues in which there are people, even in New York, places like Staten Island, who are more conservative leaning, you're still going to get those voices represented. And I think having a popular vote rather than continuing with some form of the Electoral College is not only going to help in having the voices heard of those people in rural communities who are currently being marginalized, the people of color in those communities that aren't having their voices heard, but it is going to make conservatives in urban communities also have their voices heard in a way that they aren't currently. And as I said, I question the extent to which the executive is playing a considerable role in those particular types of state issues that are of, singular interest to people in a certain region.
So it occurred to me, based off a great question from our friend Thomas in the chat, who had a question about the Electoral College, it occurred to me that it might be useful to take one moment to really diverge from our standard conversation and share my screen here a little bit so that we could have a basic breakdown of exactly how the Electoral College works. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a little simplistic what you're looking at. This is a little simplistic, but at the end of the day, this is a pretty straightforward way of how it works. The job is, you got to get the most electoral votes possible. It's essentially a game of hungry, hungry hippos, because there's 538 marbles on the table. Your job, and we get 538 by adding the number of people in the House to the number of people in the Senate, and we throw in 3 extra for Washington, D.C., because there's no allocation for it in the Constitution. So as a way of saying, whoops, we wrote the 22nd Amendment and gave them 3 electoral votes. That adds up to 538. And we split up these 538 among the states. So for every person your state has representing it in Congress, you get 1 electoral vote. Now, Missouri has 8 people in the House and 2 people in the Senate. And Missouri, as a result, has 10 electoral votes. And like almost every state, Isaiah has named a couple other states. Like every state, it is it's winner take all. So it doesn't matter how much of Missouri you win. So long as you win it, you get 100% of the state's electoral votes. You want to keep winning state after state after state until you get to 270. Now, this is kind of how it looks like back in 2016. In 2016, you had all these different results. Keep in mind, we just mentioned this. Hillary Clinton actually won the popular vote in 2016. But Donald Trump won more electoral votes because while he wasn't winning as many votes, he was winning more states, even though he was winning them narrowly. Now, the one thing I do want to mention as we're kind of looking at here, people who are chosen as electors cast their votes. There's 10 electors on behalf of Missouri who will cast a vote, but they have the ability to be faithless, which means they have the ability. And let me get back to the our conversation here. They have the ability to blow off the will of their state. Now, Isaiah, you are coming at this from a far more complex point of view than just saying everything about the Electoral College is fine. So as a result, I want to give you the floor. Do you believe that electors should be able to go faithless?
Well, thank you very much for letting me speak on this first. So I don't think they should have that ability. It is very problematic to our democracy and the way we do this. And most states have incorporated laws that faithless electors cannot happen and that they have to give their electoral votes to the winner of the statewide popular vote. There's many states that have done this, such as California, and I believe Missouri is one of them. And that is an important point of the Electoral College, is that states have the right to decide how the elections will be held. I know there are some, there's a national committee, I know it's involving the states of California, Oregon, Maryland, Illinois, et cetera, that have promised to give their electoral votes to the national popular vote winner. And that is an ability that states have. If the people in the states do have a problem with the Electoral College, they can always choose to, like I said, go for the popular vote or go for the state who they want. And similar enough, just like in Nebraska and Maine, they have the ability to distribute the electoral votes among them. Now, while yes, it is a very problem, I view the mentioning faithless electors as a problem similar to the metaphor of did the dog bark, being that the dog didn't bark, therefore there was no problem. Throughout the entirety of American history, there have been 24,000 electoral votes casted, of which only 163 were faithless electors not voting for the candidate that the state won. And not a single election in American history has been swayed by faithless electors one way or another. I'm sure a lot of the faithless electors in the 2016 election swayed more towards Bernie Sanders and Faith Spotted Eagle simply because of protests to Hillary Clinton, and that, hey, it gives more of a staunch support of the ideals of that. No, she was not the best candidate for our party, and a large portion that we lost is because of her. So let's give it to this other guy. She's not going to win anyways. So the dog does not bark. I do believe faithless electors are a problem to our democracy. However, there's not been a single instance in American history that faithless electors have swung an election one way or another. So I think that it is a very sound issue that has not caused too many problems in our history. And I don't think it is a major key point in opposition to the Electoral College.
Isaiah, thank you. Once again, you're just fantastic. Happy, both of you are doing great. And since you will not stand up for faithless electors, I shall volunteer as tribute. Gabriel, I'm going to argue the point that there should be faithless electors because, as I'm sure you share the concern occasionally of demagogues, people who can so effectively demonize a group of people that they can rally a nation, terrified of them to vote for them, and all the downsides that might come from demagogues. But in theory, because the electors actually cast their electoral votes in mid-December, they can separate themselves, in theory, from the passions of the moment and steer America away from perhaps a malicious demagogue. That is a power that electors have. So why am I off base? Why should electors, this is a part of the Electoral College constitutionally, they can be faithless. Why is that not okay?
I think it just assumes too much of singular individuals. Part of the conceit of our system is that you have to put checks in place, and they themselves, the electors, need to be checked if they are to exist. This is why I don't think there should be an Electoral College. And while I am personally very much amenable to the system that Isaiah has suggested of having proportional representation where districts are going to be drawn fairly and that each district will have their own elector that votes as the district does. I think it is better just not to have them, and if we are going to have them, to not allow them to be faithless, because it is a central conceit of democracy that demagogues... Hello?
Yep, you're fine.
Sorry, I cut out. It is a central conceit of democracy that demagogues may arise, and I think that the appropriate check for that is the power vested in the House and the Senate to impeach and convict the president.
Counterpoint, Gabriel. So I am sympathetic to the claim of checks and balances. I think that is a foundational part of what makes democracy democracy. Have to have checks and balances. And I disagree. I don't think that electors act with impunity. There are several states that if you do go faithless, the state can elect to fine you if they want to. And I think a classic example, man, I'm not going to get this right because I didn't anticipate you to raise that great point. I believe it's Washington. Washington will fine you $1,000 if you vote faithless. And so that is a way the state tries to exert some checks and balance over the electors. Your thoughts on that?
I think that fines are fundamentally, fines as a punishment for a crime mean that whatever that transgression is only a crime if you are poor. So
at the end of the day, so we Politically Active was very fortunate back in, it was either 2018 or 2019. We were very fortunate back when OTC was very Zoom heavy. We zoomed in a faithless elector from the 2016 election. And Isaiah went above and beyond to name check Faith Spotted Eagle. Faith Spotted Eagle is the first Native American to ever receive an electoral vote in American history, thanks to an elector named Daniel Satayacum out of Washington. And we zoomed him in and we asked him what he thought. Why did you do this? Are you undermining democracy? And he had consulted some political people that he trusted, and he said that it was assured to me that if I voted faithless, it would not swing the election one way or another. I didn't like Hillary Clinton, even though he was put up by Democrats. I didn't like Donald Trump either, but he's a Native American himself. Daniel Satayacum is Native American. And he was like, this is somebody who is a really big environmentalist protester. He's speaking of Faith Spotted Eagle. And as a result, this is somebody who I thought would be a really good leader. And so it was a protest vote, but it was also a dreams of the heart vote a little bit as well. Isaiah, is that what you're talking about? Is like, this is not the use of an electoral vote that you're okay with? Or does that sound like something that should continue to be a part of the process?
Well, I do think that is okay to do it because he wasn't sure, and there was no doubt unreasonably that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency if he voted faithless or not. It was a protest vote against Hillary Clinton. And although I am virulently against faithless electors, I see that more okay as rather than just voting for candidate you wanted to win. Like, I don't know the elector, his name by himself, but I know someone in the Republican state of Texas voted for John Kasich and Ron Paul over Donald Trump. I view that as less, just not okay compared to voting for Faith Spotted Eagle over Hillary Clinton, because you are putting at risk the winner of our system so that you may protest against them, which is far different than protesting against the loser and showing that you don't support them, and that is their punishment, and that is what you stand for. And personally, I do think his decision on a personal level to vote for Faith Spotted Eagle was one of the most profound faithless electors in history, and that he does have a merit to his claims.
Gabriel, any thoughts?
I mean, I don't disagree that he has a merit to his claims insofar as it is a protest vote, but I do think that it is perhaps disrespectful to the people whose votes he was representing to do so. And that is, I think, another reason for having a direct electoral system for the executive, because then whoever wants to can vote how they please, whether it be a protest vote or not. And if we do still want to ensure that whoever the executive is has to secure majority support from the populace, then I think we should just change the system so that if no one secures a majority, we have a runoff.
So Isaiah had mentioned something a little bit earlier, and what was this called, Isaiah? Can you help me remember the National Popular Vote Compact?
Yes, the
What was it
National
called?
Popular Vote Compact.
Okay.
I think it was actually called that, yeah.
Okay, so I believe it was actually called that as well. And would you like to take one additional moment? You did explain it a moment ago, but I want to put it under the microscope for a hot second. Can you re-explain it?
So essentially, the National Popular Vote Compact is a compact between about 13 states. I am not going to name them all, but I know Illinois, California, Maryland, New York, and most New England states besides New Hampshire and Maine. And essentially what they're doing is that they have a compact that no matter who wins the popular vote, they will give their electoral votes to the popular vote winner. And that in many places like helps their point and supports the founding of this country, because if the selected representatives decide to do that and the people are okay with that, they can always just hand their their electoral college votes over to the national popular vote winner, subverting the electoral college in a way, but also supporting the electoral college and the democratic process and from a state representative.
What are your thoughts? I have a couple thoughts myself, but I'm supposed to be a moderator here. Gabriel, what are your thoughts generally about the National Popular Vote Compact?
I mean, I think it's better than the system we have, but I think there's a lot of half measures that are better than the current system we have, and I still think we would be better off switching to a direct system of electing the executive. I mean, the executive should be dependent on the people themselves for his continuance in office, and I think the more mediators we put between that, the more we dilute the power of the American people.
You know, I think a major problem with it, the National Popular Vote Compact, I'm kind of agnostic on its aims, because I see the merit in the Electoral College. I also think there are very real issues. I mean, I think it's reasonable to want to preserve it. I think it's reasonable to want to discard it. The National Popular Vote Compact, I'm just going to call it the Compact. Yeah, the Compact is optional. It's not binding. And by the way, all the states that signed on to it were states that heavily vote for Democrats. And right now, I just don't think there's any doubt the Electoral College, at least slightly by a percentage point or two, favors Republicans just in a neutral 50-50 normal election. And I don't think any swing states have signed on. I know no Republican states have signed on. And so it'd be interesting to me is if we lived in an alternative universe where all of a sudden a Democrat won in 2024, the Electoral College, despite losing the popular vote, if they'd hold to it. And I don't know what the answer to that is, actually. So we got a bunch of states that are just going to vote the way that they're going to vote normally anyways. And so it doesn't affect them. And then in addition to that, it's non-binding. Like it would have to be a law passed through Congress, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Are you wanting me to respond?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Oh, I totally, like, that is a thing that I don't think most of those states, like, hypothetically speaking, let's just, take a little bit out of reality. Let's say Donald Trump loses the Electoral College, but wins the popular vote. I doubt personally that any of those states are going to fork over their electoral votes to Donald Trump. I think that is just too partisan. And while it is a good idea on paper, it would have to be binding and it would have to be supported by some form of Congress. But that brings up a constitutional standpoint, because I know the states, they have the right to decide how the elections are ran. And if Congress made a bill, dictating that you have to, essentially subvert your state's winner to give it to a different candidate, that's probably because of constitutional crisis and will very well might just be struck down by the Supreme Court. But I do see that as a viable alternative if they are willing to cooperate to the national popular vote. And one thing I would like to add on personally, if we have enough time, is more about the, what I mentioned earlier, the proportion system, if I might be allowed some time.
That is possible. That is possible, and maybe a future constitution. Matter of fact, there is a debate right now over, we're not really exploring that topic right now, and we're not exploring ranked choice voting, but I think we need to have a broader conversation about both of those. Because what you just said, proportional voting, that's how most Western democracies do it. We're the weirdos for doing it the way that we do it now, although we do it for specifically historical reasons. Gabriel, if I can grill you just a little bit here, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I understand the merits of the popular vote. You want, our democracy is largely built on the most people that want A over B, they should get A over B. But if we're going to add any other considerations, like defending America against a demagogue, or ensuring that wider swaths of Americans are heard, rather than just the Americans in the most populous areas, if we ever add another consideration other than what the most people want, then there is a non-zero chance in any given election that the majority popularly may in fact lose. Do you believe that there should be any other considerations as to who should be president in these elections other than what the majority wants? Or do you think it should be purely just what the majority wants?
For the president, I do think it should be purely what the majority wants. I think we have a separation of powers in the United States that allows us to have directly elected representatives, and we can have them in the legislature and we can have them in the executive branch, and they should be able to check each other to a significant enough degree that that is tolerable.
So if I can continue pushing back on you, sir, because I know you're good for it. You're not wrong in a vacuum. In a vacuum, you're not wrong. We do have another branch that can literally remove the president on a whim. They can do that. The problem is that all the social science studies that we have show that people's voting behaviors is overwhelmingly driven by their feelings about the president, all the way down to school boards. I mean, not just senators, not just governors, but I mean, all the way down to like city council. And we see that here in Springfield some too. Anyways, so while you're not wrong, what you're saying is not wrong, but if a demagogue is really, really effective at scaring the crap out of people and getting them to vote for himself, then he's going to have, what is it they call that in politics, where you have a really long jacket and people can slide along on it? It means
Coattails?
Coattails. Thank you, sir. He could have coattails to bring along a like-minded Congress. So that it does not enter into your head perhaps as a concern or a pushback on your point just now.
I mean, it certainly does, but our current system also doesn't insulate us from that at all, as we have already seen, or at least not to any considerable degree, given what has happened during the past few years. And I think that if we are going to continue the democratic project, then it is worth it to go all in on it and honestly give the people the power to get whatever outcomes they see fit and handle the consequences of those outcomes.
Isaiah, if I can grill you for a second now, we're lucky to have you here today, sir, and in part because you're providing a far more nuanced version of the Electoral College than the one we have now. You're not blindly defending it. You're suggesting reforms yourself. I got a beef with one of them. And one of the reforms that you offered is that you see a role for some faithless electors in some circumstances. And otherwise, the faithless electors that are, so in other words, it seems like you're making a determination that some faithless elector reasons are acceptable and other faithless elector reasons are unacceptable. How on earth could you possibly draw an objective line between the two? And I hope I restated you properly, and your floor.
I think you made a great point and really did put me in the corner for this one.
That's what I like to do. I like to make you sweat.
I think I personally believe that each state should personally outlaw faithless electors to give them a fine, like you said. But in some instances where there is a protest vote or something against it, like majority of the, let's say, less than a majority of, in my system, a district voted for a person and they were to protest against that person. There's a distinction because the outcome cannot be deterred for a faithless elector to be morally okay from my perspective. So like with Faith Spotted Eagle, it was a very profound and merit-filled thing, in my opinion, to vote for her for many reasons. It gave voice to a minority group in America. It was historical a historical recipient of an electoral vote, and it gave a lot of value to the way we see politics. However, it is problematic. And at the end of the day, I cannot stand by it fully. And I prefer that faithless electors would be banned and punishable. And that at the end of the day, if you win a district in my version of Electoral College, or if you win a state in the current version of Electoral College, you have to vote for the Electoral College voters have to vote for you. That is my point.
Isaiah, we are coming up against it. Do you have a closing statement, closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I very much would.
And before you do, I would love to encourage anybody who's following along right now, if you have any thoughts, anything you'd like to share. I'm getting really good questions from our friend Thomas in the chat, asking to further explain the Electoral College. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have the ability to do that today. But if you have any questions that you would like to ask either of these people, or questions you'd like to throw to the room, we'd be open to them. But before we get those, Isaiah, your floor.
All right. I will give Thomas this. So basically, look up Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. Although the language is a little more archaic to what we have, it is fairly simple from my perspective to understand, and it basically encapsulates the Electoral College perfectly. If we have time, I will explain it more further in depth, but that is to the best of my ability I can deliver to you now. So my closing statement is that while I do see the Electoral College to have a lot of problems with it, I don't think we should entirely gut the whole system. I believe that there is merit to it. There's certainly a lot of merit to it, and that we do not have the worst democratic process in the world relative to other things. I do think as it stands now, we do give a lot of voices to people who don't normally have voices, such as the rural people up in New Hampshire, rural steel miners in Ohio, peanut farmers in Georgia. I think this is a very unique thing that no other democracy has in the world, and it has a lot of merit and praise. I do believe in changing the system, however, and I think my adaptations to the system will only further increase the merits to it, such as like Gabriel or Andrew said earlier, that if we have, this more, sorry, I'm blinking. If we have a more like you win this certain district or certain area, those people's voices are heard way better than if every single district in the state was to vote at the same time, and whoever got 51% of the vote or one vote ahead got every single electoral vote. And I believe my proposal would solve a lot of that issue.
Isaiah, we've been honored to host you. Thank you so much. Gabriel, do you have parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
I do. So if I could, I'll close with I'll start my close with some words from Hamilton, and that is that the executive should be independent for his continuance in office on all but the people themselves. I think it is centrally important that the voices of the American people be heard in the determination of their executive in as clear a way as possible. We are a nation that has not always measured up to the goals we have set out of equality and justice. But I do think that the direct election of the executive is the most equal way for all voices of the American people to be heard. And I think that given that there is yet to be a system developed by mankind that is free of corruption or the risk of demagogues, that we are better off accepting that risk as we may and attempting to create a more informed, more active populace who can make those decisions for themselves with the best information that we can provide them with. And then we will accept the consequences of our collective actions.
And Gabriel, I will give you one last parting shot from our friend Thomas in the chat. He says he agrees with you. He says he agrees people's voices should be heard. He says, I also believe that there should be a balance within that, because there are so many viewpoints within today's society of humanity. Gabriel, give us your parting shot, and then that'll be that. And just before you even answer, I do want to thank everybody for following along, for commenting, a few of you, and primarily I want to thank our two presenters. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Well, I think that having a direct election gives more room for those voices to be heard when you don't have to worry about whoever gets the most votes in my state or in my county or in my district is going to get all of the electoral votes. It starts to weaken the strength of that two-party system. It is easier to cast a protest vote when you don't have to worry about all of the votes being swayed that way. And if we transition so that if there is no one who gets a majority of the vote, we have a runoff, then at least in that first stage, we can see that there are third parties, there are independents that are able to gain ground. And when you see those movements starts to build, more people will split off from the established two-party system. And we can have our voices heard in a more meaningful way that undermine the consolidated power of the Republican and the Democratic parties.
Isaiah, I'm happy to give you one additional minute if there's any other parting shots you'd like to dish.
All right, thank you. I think we've made some great points today. However, I think another positive that is intentionalized for that I previously mentioned that I'd like to add on before we close is that the Electoral College is designed for a majority of the vote, a majority of the population to decide the president. And by having majority of the vote, I do think there would be problems with our system if it was not necessarily two parties. Because if we had a president who was elected with only 25% of the vote compared to someone with 24% of the vote, I think the person with 25% of the vote being president causes a lot of problems as a majority of the Americans not choose the most powerful position to be held from the people. And I think that the current system we have, even though the two-party system is incredibly flawed, I do think one point the Electoral College has above the other ones is that it does prevent us from the person who got less than 0.25% of the population vote from being president. And that is one merit, although a very flawed merit, I see with the Electoral College.
Once again, this was OTC's Constitution Day activity. We were hosting a conversation that I would do 3 more hours of this if I could, but thank you so much once again. Very quiet applause to everybody listening, very quiet applause to our presenters, and be thinking about this issue. We have another presidential election roughly a year from now, and perhaps some of these issues will bubble up over the course of the conversation. Thank you so much, everybody.
Before we quit, I have a question about the 17th. So where will Constitution Day be held?
We don't have this is our Constitution Day event because it's on a Sunday. So, all right. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Take care.
Adios.